The second thing we knew is to take a youth development focus. Again, the needs of young people are different than adults, right? Most young people wind up homeless without ever having experience of running their own home, of dealing with a landlord, getting a bank account sorted out, that kind of thing. Many young people leave home never having made it their own doctor's appointment, right? Young people are also, depending on their age, going through important developmental changes. These can be physiological, maybe going through puberty. They're growing, eating a ton. If you have teenagers, you know what I'm talking about. Cognitive changes, cognitive development that can impair decision making. Relational changes, right? There's lots of firsts that come with being a teenager. Your first kiss, your first time you drive a car, adult relationships and friendships, these kinds of things. So we need to really model our youth response on that and not just take the adult homelessness response and create homelessness junior by changing the age mandate. We have to do things differently. And we also have to understand, and this is another structural shift, how the world has changed in Canada, the world in Canada. It's different now to be 16, 17, 18. As I was saying, right, like with child protection. A lot of our systems for young people are based on the 1950s, but the world has changed. You need to stay in school longer, right? Credentialism matters, like when you're looking for a job. Used to be a high school diploma is all you need, off you go. Now you need college or university, right? Where this is in the past, you didn't. So people are staying in school longer, and we're encouraging young people to do that, right? I mean, if you have kids, I'm sure you're telling them, stay in school. It's good. And in fact, young people are. What do you think the dropout rate is in Canada? People failing to complete high school. Any ideas? The figure that often gets tossed around is 30%. That was true when I was in high school, but it's actually below 9%. It's about 8.5%. The dropout rate amongst homeless youth is about 65%. That's a big deal. And we know from research that the lifelong outcomes of those who drop out versus those who don't are quite different in terms of competing in the labor market, health and well-being, those kind of things. So people stay in school longer. Full-time jobs paying living wage are scarce, right? When I was a teenager, I used to work in the summer at a place called Petrogas outside of Calgary. Got a lot of money, full-time, great stuff. That helped me go to university. Now my kids in the summer get part-time jobs at the Gap for minimum wage, right? And young people, both of these things contribute to young people staying at home a lot longer. The last census in Canada found in 2011 that the percentage of young people between 20 and 29, not 15 and 20, between 20 and 29 who live with their parents is over 42%, right? That's a lot. Right? And so if you have young people in your house, how many people have people in that age bracket living with them, right? And so here's the good news, one day they'll move out, but the bad news is they'll probably move back home at some point too, right? So like the world has changed, right? And so we really need to recognize this when we're thinking about a response to youth homelessness. Because if our focus is when someone becomes homeless is to rush them to independence, we're going to fail because the world around them is very different. Right? It's not like, let's get you housed and get you in a training program, get you a job. We have to help young people move into adulthood at the time and pace that a young person needs. That's our focus, is a transition to adulthood, not simply a transition to independence. And then finally, we need to consider what works and for whom in terms of like those age differences matter. The needs of young women are going to be different than young men. Sexual orientation, we have to ensure that young people who become homeless are safe. And ethnicity matters. So Aboriginal youth, we need to figure out what approach is going to work and support young people who, are experiencing intergenerational trauma and have experienced racism on a regular basis. Newcomers to Canada, what are their needs if they're young, right? They're going to be different. They might have linguistic barriers or other things. They won't know the system, that kind of thing. So we have to work on those kind of things. And then finally, we have to stop doing what isn't working. And this is an important lesson, I think, for Red Deer, right? Often in communities, particularly smaller centers, we're loath to really invest in responding to youth homelessness, because we think it's a big city problem, and it's not. I mean, youth homelessness, the drivers of youth homelessness exist in every community, regardless of size. But if we don't work on supporting young people in our communities, they leave our communities. And that's the worst thing that can happen, right? Because when a young person lives in Red Deer, if they have tensions with their family, they also probably are going to school and may have friends that are supportive. There may be other adults in the world, either teachers or coaches or that kind of thing. They know the area. They're familiar with the area. And when we wrench people out from their communities and force them to go to big cities, we put them in danger, in harm's way. They're more likely to get involved in street youth culture. They're much more vulnerable to exploitation, sexual exploitation, and economic exploitation. So we have to stop that. We need to retool our emergency services and not build everything around that. And we have to stop using policing as a response to homelessness. And I know Lethbridge has been doing some innovation around that, and Calgary has. I'm not sure if you're doing that in Red Deer, but it's worth looking at it, because often we deal with social problems by using law enforcement. So give people tickets. In Toronto, that's what they're doing. They're chucking tickets at people. Young people wind up with huge amounts of tickets for all kinds of ridiculous things, for jaywalking, that kind of thing. They do it to harass them so they leave downtown. But here's the problem. When they wind up leaving homelessness, they now have a debt, which goes with them. What happens in most cities is that the municipalities sell the debt to collection agencies, right? So if you owe a bunch of fines, you'll need to consider that after those speeding tickets on the way up. That stays with you. And so you get housed, and then someone knocks at the door and says, you owe $4,000 worth of tickets, right? So totally, again, bad policy we have to stop. So I'm going to talk about prevention. As I said before, when we talk about prevention, we sometimes get stuck. Well, yeah, we need to prevent youth homelessness, but what might that look like? So let's go through some of the learnings from around the world, how to do this differently, right? Like, what does it look like at the policy and program level? And so this is a model that I use. People talk about prevention in different ways. Often they use a public health model, which is primary, secondary, tertiary. This is kind of a looking more at the primary and secondary level. So in terms of homelessness, or responding to youth homelessness, we'll go through each of these: primary, and then systems prevention, and then early intervention. So primary prevention means working upstream to prevent new cases. And so again, from a government perspective, you need to really invest, and a community perspective, right? You've got to invest in your anti-poverty strategy. You need to deal with things like racism and homophobia, right? You need to make sure that young people in schools are well taken care of, that they have enough to eat. There's lots we can do that we need to deal with family violence, right? And take that on, but also give families support. Because sometimes things fall apart, and it's not that there's violence in the household or whatever, it's just that tensions develop and things go off the rails. And families often don't have the supports they need, that's both parents and young people, to work together and move forward. So we have to do a lot of these things, right? Which is interesting, and of course a lot of people go, well, we can't do that, we have to focus on the homelessness issue. But if we don't focus on these upstream things, then there's constantly going to be a flow of people into homelessness. We're going to be, at the bottom of the stream with a bucket catching people. So we need to figure that out. And again, from a government perspective, I know that's the way you're thinking too, is that, if we're going to tackle homelessness, we have to see it as a fusion policy issue. Everybody's got to be at the table and doing their bit. We also need to work in schools. That's my high school. Lovely. It kind of looks like prison. Kind of felt like that too. That's really important. And I think if you're thinking about a response to youth homelessness, working with the school boards is like a really important place to start. Because if you talk to anybody here, a teacher, school teacher? Okay. So would you be able to identify young people that you would say are at risk? Like you'd say, that person I think is very likely to become homeless, right? Like most teachers can say that, right? Like when things are going off the rails. But the problem for teachers is that we lump all this responsibility for them to be experts at everything, including solving homelessness. right? The places that do the best job of responding to youth homelessness, I would argue, are places like Australia, where they build the youth homelessness response into the schools, so that every school has workers that are connected to the youth homelessness sector, that help teachers, educate students, give teachers support so that the teacher, when they know somebody's going wrong with Johnny, have somebody they can contact and talk to, right? They do family mediation work, that kind of stuff. Getting into the schools is really key. Working with families is important. Again, we have to help families connect with the resources that they need, right? And in schools, you'll know that, right? Like, you'll be able to identify where these things are happening. More investment in helping parents do their work and supporting young people. And a lot of things we know from education, I'm in the Faculty of Education, these are really key to you know, some of the things that are interesting is that early childhood education, so preschool, adequate nutrition, and enriched engagement in arts and sports, those things are known to contribute to a reduce in violence, right? Like, if you get young people into school early, their chance of being, or their likelihood of being a criminal actually drops. So these are also things that can, I think, work to prevent youth homelessness. And then again, we have to focus on anti-discrimination. If we know discrimination contributes to homelessness, then we have to confront that and not tolerate it. And also ensure that in our response to youth homelessness, we're not reproducing that even more, right? That there isn't discrimination within the services.